Welcome to Crosstalk. It is said that Kenya has billions, if you put it in terms of finances, of assets, in terms of infrastructure, land, buildings, corporations, and even minerals. But the question is, are we effectively using our assets to help us build on our economy? And that's the conversation we are going to have today. And our chief guest is the Cabinet Secretary of Treasury, FCPA, Honorable John Mbadi. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
We are also joined by a team of directors from the National Treasury and Economic Planning that are members of our audience, and they'll be contributing to the conversations that we have today. We are also joined by different policy analysts and economists from different sectors of our nation, and they'll also be ready to weigh in into the conversations that we have today. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Crosstalk. Some applause for me. Thank you so very much. And Crosstalk starts right now. And we start with assets management. CS, just before we get into understanding exactly the economic value of our assets, maybe it will be good to start by defining, when we talk about public assets, what exactly are we talking about?
Thank you very much, JP, and thank you very much, our listeners and viewers. I believe we also have Family TV, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so in terms of defining public assets, generally, what is an asset? An asset is a resource that has future value. But in terms of public assets, I would say that this is a resource owned or controlled by government. There's a distinction between owning and controlling. Mm-hmm. Like when you lease a vehicle, you don't own it, but you control it. So any asset that is owned or controlled by the government and has future economic value, but in terms of government, you don't just look at the economic value. Mm. You also look at the social benefits. Mm. So any resource owned, controlled, and has a future economic or social benefit is what one would define as a public asset.
Okay.
Yes, and the future here is deliberate. If you just buy, if you have, you buy a good and you consume it immediately, it has a value, but does it have a future value?
Okay.
So it cannot be an asset. An asset must demonstrate that there is a value to be derived over a period of time.
Okay. What is this value when we look at our economic aspect to using our assets to help us grow the economy? What would you say is the economic value of assets that we have as a nation?
In terms
towards its contribution,
yeah.
For instance, in our economic growth. So if we have different portfolios,
yes.
How will these portfolios then fit into yes. our economic growth? Yeah.
Exactly. So economic value here is, so what do we derive from the use of this asset? The public assets support economic activities. So government, when the entire economy, and this is not just now government depending on the assets, because the government's role is to provide a platform for economic activities to thrive. So the private sector rely heavily on government to provide infrastructure, to provide for them assets, which then they would use to generate private wealth, in the process also supporting government activities, because that private wealth that is generated will create employment and deal with the social aspect or social disorder that would have been there because people don't have jobs. Now they will have jobs as a result of working in the private sector. Further to that, the private sector will support government activities by paying taxes and levies that governments charges on use of public assets. Actually, sometimes people don't ask that. We don't ask ourselves, why is it that we must pay taxes? We pay taxes for use of government assets and providing the environment and the platform. So it's like you are paying for using those government assets. And that payment is again what is used to develop and generate more assets. Yes. So that is the economic value of the government assets.
Can our public asset sustain our country's economy? If you look at it in totality, because the question then is, if Kenya has these assets, how comes then these assets financially are not contributing to the national budgeting process, for instance?
No, I get your question. Our public assets need and should sustain our economy and economic activities if they are used optimally. So optimal utilization, we must optimize utilization of our public assets. Kenya has assets, in my view, if you put in Kenya shillings, running into trillions, not just billions. I must admit that there is work that is ongoing in terms of compiling our assets. And this is informed by the fact that we have had an accounting system where we were basing our financial statements on cash basis of accounts. So we have not been very keen in documenting, valuing, and putting together the value of our public assets. But that work is ongoing, as you are aware that we are moving towards accrual basis of accounting, where now the public assets will be documented and form the body of our financial statements. The financial position of the country will be known. So the value of these assets is in trillions. If we document them, if we value them, if we value our land, if we value our government buildings, if you value our roads, value all the public assets in general, the water projects, the dams, those are all public assets. So once we value them, you'll find that the value runs into that. So now, to come back to your question and address how, if the public assets would be able to sustain, yes, they would. And as I pointed out, we need to optimally use our assets. And that optimal utilization of assets is something that is still challenging, that we feel we have not utilized our assets optimally. But again, you'll also agree with me that the assets that we have invested in is also generating quite a lot of value. If you look at our roads, if the roads were not there, the economic activities that's thriving in the country, we would not be seeing those economic activities. People would not be moving their wares. Mama mbogas would not be moving their vegetables from Murang'a to Nairobi. We would not be moving fish from Kisumu to Nairobi. And that is why you see when we face challenges, we say we need to open up Ridoni Summit so that the flow of traffic is eased. What we are basically saying is so that we can promote economic activity much more. So I want to stop there, and I want to encourage my directors and my team that if one of you has something to add on any question that is asked, please just indicate. And as I say in the Treasury, we are a team.
There's a microphone that is ready just in case.
Just in case someone wants to add something, especially those who are coming from PIPM.
Thank you very much, Waziri. I like the question which has been brought out in terms of how can we leverage on these assets to reduce, one, maybe public debt, the pressure on borrowing more, and the pressure also on taxation to Kenyans. So there are a number of aspects that this can apply. When you look at some of the key assets that we have, Waziri has already told you that, these run in trillions. So currently our estimate is about 4 trillion in terms of the value of assets that we have today. Of course, there is ongoing activity which the minister has put in as a reform measure to now be able to get a better, accurate measure. So when you look at some of these key assets that we've developed from the ports, for example, you go to the airports that we have, go to the key roads, maybe one among them, for example, the expressway gives a good example of what the minister talked about between the difference, for you to see the difference between ownership and control. For example, we own the superhighway, but then it's controlled because it's a PPP project by the developers of that project for a particular period until they finish recouping their investment. Then it will now revert to government by purposes of control. So there's quite a lot that can happen in that space in terms of hit now. So how do we now leverage on this to reduce, say, more borrowing or to reduce the pressure on taxation? So some of them would be things like privatization of some of those assets. We can also leverage on these, say, on some leasing models. We can also leverage in some cases by also giving out management contracts so that we can get private sector participation in the running of these assets so that we can enhance the outcomes that we can generate from these assets. So if we were to really optimize this with that estimate of 4 trillion, assuming the figure is roughly there, if you were to work, say, on even an 8% return on those assets, at that point, you'd already be seeing at about 320 billion that you could generate a year. And definitely that could go a long way to be able to cushion government from raising taxes or going for borrowing. Thank you.
And maybe just to add, there's something I forgot. I think Lawrence has ably demonstrated to you how we can leverage on our public assets to manage or support our economic activities and even reduce our debt level. There are various assets. We have assets, just so that it is understood, we have buildings and structures like the government offices. We have the universities, like where they are learning. If it's a public university, that's our public asset. We have public health facilities, even some utilities that are provided. We have the natural resources, of course, the forest, our wildlife. We have mineral resources as well, although I'm not really advocating. I'm one person who, I think this will not make people happy, but I don't advocate that we get many minerals. Any country with minerals in Africa is in turmoil. But anyway, if we get those are our resources. And there are also movable assets. We know what movable assets are, the vehicles, etc. And we also have intangible assets, like the copyrights, we can patent. And so we have numerous assets, and that is why I would agree with the figure that the estimates that Lawrence is giving of about 4 trillion, if not more. Yes.
There's the aspect of now that we have devolved units, counties.
Yes.
So how do we make that distinction where if I'm coming from, let's say, Kakamega County, for instance, and there's a public asset, does that only belongs to that region or is still a source of revenue to the national government?
Malombe will take that. I want us to spread now this discussion. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I think, moderator, one of the issues is public assets. Some of them are in the county, others are in the country. So you may not be able to say this is particularly an asset for Kitui County or Kakamega County. For example, a public road. It will cut across Nairobi, go all the way to Nakuru, Kericho, Kisumu. Then we have county-specific public assets. For example, an hospital. A level 4 hospital is a county-specific. But Kenyans across the board will access services from these public assets. Then we have also public assets which are supposed to facilitate other regions. For example, water transmission. Not every region of Kenya can get a dam. And then you find you need water bulking and distribution channels. Then you get water from Murang'a, it comes through Kiambu to Nairobi. So these assets are not county specific, they are national. Then we have a small bore in Kitui. That bore in Kitui is a county public asset. It is providing services to Kenyans in Kitui, and they do appreciate that. So we don't want to say Kenyans look at assets based on counties. Counties are units of administration for purposes of delivering public assets. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, we have one government, only that is devolved. So yes, there could be some assets which we have transferred to counties, but I will tell you that largely, like land, it is managed. I'm the custodian.
But there's also the question of some of these public assets
Yeah.
are in the hands of a few elites. The issue of mismanagement of public assets, for instance. So who has the priority or the oversight on public assets?
Public assets that are in the hands of those elites, those are thieves. Those are people who have grabbed, we have seen people who go even and grab police stations,
Yes.
grab land that belongs to Posta. In fact, Posta is one of the largest landowners in the country. But those ones, you deal with them like criminals. Those are actually criminals whose times have not come to arrest them. They may have power today, but tomorrow you may not have the power. So you'll be arrested at one point. You are not supposed to take control, convert a public asset to private use.
Okay. There's the aspect of Bomas of Kenya. I know we can talk about privatization and we'll be talking about PPP, but what is happening around there? Because there's news that it's no longer going to be a public asset.
Was that news or propaganda?
Maybe you have an opportunity
so
to clarify.
Yeah, that was, in my view, not news. That is, it is interesting that it came from a former deputy president, so I'm a bit reserved. I would have said that is a very ignorant person, but there is no better word to describe him. Because I really don't understand why he came up with that wild allegation. Because interestingly, John, just 2 days before he made that pronouncement, I just signed an approval, a request from the line ministry to support, from the State Department, to approve expenditure out of the tourism fund of 4.5 billion shillings to renovate Bomas of Kenya. So how then one would wake up one morning and calls himself a truthful man and say that Bomas has been given to a Turkish, was it a Turkish businessman? So that is completely not correct.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
That facility belongs to us. And by the way, I think Kenyans need to understand, there is no one who can give out a Kenyan asset without due process. Even for you today to settle people in a forest, you must get Parliament's approval. Settling Kenyans, not even someone from outside, settling a Kenyan in a forest legally, procedurally, you have to go through parliamentary approval. So how would you give out an asset to anyone without the due process?
Okay. The government, we've seen in other instances where they have leased or privatized public assets.
Yes.
How does this benefit the common person, or how do we make sure that these assets that we privatize or lease come back to benefit the common person?
Yeah, actually, when I started my contribution on discussion around this topic, I talked about optimization of use of public assets, or optimal use of public assets. Public assets would only be of economic value if they are used prudently and efficiently. If you just keep a public asset there lying idle without much use, then it adds no value at all to the economy. And therefore, if the government has no immediate use of public assets, you can lease it out for better and optimal utilization. Because again, any asset, if it stays unused, like if you take a brand new car and you park it for 2 years, you will have problems restarting it. So asset must be used to generate economic value and to remain economically viable. Secondly, on the issue of privatization, you know, government is not in the business of doing business. Governments world over are known for policy formulation and implementation, and you leave the work of running businesses and doing business to the private sector. Government is not supposed to compete with private sector in doing business. But you see, we are coming from a period where most of the economic activities were being conducted by government over the years, a more controlled system. And two, there are certain social and very critical services that the government could not trust at that time with the private sector. And so you need to have some public sector involvement. But as we mature as a democracy, as we mature as an economy, the government must divest, must move consistently and systematically away from running businesses. So then that takes you to those businesses or those enterprises which were controlled, run by the government. What do you do with them? So you privatize. And in the privatizing, you improve efficiency in the running of these enterprises, especially if they are commercially viable. Okay. And we have seen examples. You improve governance, you bring a corporate governance system that would then now be more profitable, more productive. Okay. I would just cite two examples. Take the example of KenGen. KenGen, when it was privatized in, was it 2016?
2006.
2006, yes, sorry, 2006, a while ago. The value, the total value of its assets were just about 51 billion. Today, KenGen is at 516 billion. Yeah, look at that kind of growth. And KenGen is the first, let me call it state-owned enterprise, to move out of Kenya and do business outside Kenya, in places like Djibouti, Ethiopia. They are invested there. They have done activities there. If you look at the China, most of these construction firms, Chinese construction firms that you see here, they are state-owned, but with privatization element in them. And you can see how effective they are. So KenGen is now generating, just the other day we picked a check of 3 billion.
3 billion.
Yeah, from KenGen, just in terms of dividends. I don't think that would be practical in the past if it was completely state-owned. The other example is Safaricom. Safaricom, remember, was just a small department within telecom. Now, Safaricom is the leading company in this country because of privatization. And in privatizing, you can generate revenue, and you also give it space to be run commercially.
Okay. Before privatization, is there an aspect or element of public participation? Or this is something that the government just wakes up and says, we want to privatize or lease this? Do we involve the public in terms of participation? And as the CS answers that, I'll be coming to pick questions now from our audience members as well, so you can prepare.
I will address that. You know, the two examples that I gave actually were even before the 2010 Constitution. But even then, there was quite a bit of public participation. I'm sure, JP, remember, there was even craze and move to buy shares at Safaricom that time. Almost every, including my wife, but I didn't buy. My wife rushed to buy. I don't know whether she still owns those shares. She has never declared to me that she bought. She has received some dividend out of Safaricom. But everybody knew that at least Safaricom is being privatized. The same with KenGen. But now with the 2010 Constitution, the threshold has even been raised. Now you have to involve the public. Article 201 of the Constitution is very, very clear on public engagement. Yeah?
Okay.
It's actually Article 220, I think, on public engagement. you must now involve the public. You can't do anything. In fact, and now last year even taught us much more. That even that involvement, even though you involve them, but you must also take into consideration. You know, there is one thing to involve and another to incorporate the views. If you don't incorporate the views, these young people will come for you. You wanted
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Maybe then we'll come.
Thank you, Isaac. I think the only point maybe I just needed to add is when you talked about bombers. We also have, bombers is a very important asset for the country. And you can see the plan for government is to now enhance the viability of bombers by now setting up a Bombers International Conference Center so that we can enhance the MICE activities in Kenya, which will basically be increasing international meetings that can happen, international conventions, international exhibitions that can happen in the country. And this is because, since independence, we only have one convention center, which is KICC. And you remember last year, the Treasury had also brought in a kind of an optimization measure of KICC, that though KICC is worth maybe about 30 billion today, we are not getting good value. We're not deriving good value out of it in that, it's supposed to play its rightful place as a MICE attraction center, where we should be having many international meetings, many international conventions happening in Nairobi. But that requires, a very commercial orientation, and that is what government wanted to have. And the reasoning of this, and even the reinvigoration of bombers, is because of positioning Kenya as a top MICE destination. And look at the impact of that within the Kenyan economy. If you look at the hotels around the CBD over the years, you have Intercon, for example, Intercontinental Hotel, which is a very successful brand world over. Why is it that it has not thrived in Kenya? You can't say it's management or anything else. Look at Hilton, another very successful international brand world over. Look at Ground Plaza, which was in Upper Hill. It's also failed. And when you even look at the ones which are in existence, they are really quite struggling, because hotels will thrive if you have a very strong MICE proposition. And that is what government was looking for.
Like Regency.
Yes, and like Regency. And all those have struggled and they've gone down. Because
it is nothing to do with our environment?
No. It's a MICE positioning. Okay. It's a MICE positioning plan. So if you had a very good value proposition at KICC, like we're saying, get a private sector player to maybe even come and either bring it as maybe within a management program, within a leasing program, or even privatization. Because you see, we have not been able to derive the value from it. And that's why all these hotels are going down. So if you are to position that, then now had another new facility at Bomas, then Kenya will then reclaim its rightful position as a MICE destination country. And with that, you will be having very many international conventions, many international meetings happening in Nairobi almost on a weekly basis. And in that, you will now attract a number of good hotels. The ones which are there will be able to thrive. And look at the ripple effect in the economy. People have to supply food stuff to these places, what the impact it will have in the transport network, the taxi network and all that. So it will have a huge ripple effect to the economy. If you go to Dubai today is basically in existence because of that, the visits that people make to attend many conferences and many of those activities. Same thing to places like Durban in South Africa. And that is what government wants to create, even as it puts up Bomas International Convention Center, so that we can reclaim our space. Because you see, you're a top tourist destination country. So if we now enhance that by also being a MICE, a top MICE destination host country, then you can see the ripple effect that will have, and that is how you can actually leverage on your assets to now be able to enhance revenue mobilization within the country. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Elizabeth Nema, a student leader from the University of Nairobi. I'd like to say, as a young person, I'm glad that the CS has said that there's public engagement and consideration, and that makes me happy as a young person. And my question to the CS is, can an independent body audit government assets to enhance transparency and also foster accountability for public trust?
Yeah, my question is on privatization program which is in the country. If deliberate policies can be put in place so that they benefit the common mwananchi and not only the elites.
Yes, there is the aspect of an independent body to oversight and do proper audit on our public assets, because for accountability purposes.
Yes, Elizabeth asked if we could have an independent body to audit the government for transparency, accountability, and possibly reliability, and to enhance public trust. I want to point out that we have a constitution. Our constitution gives the mandate of auditing government and public institutions to one office, and that is Office of the Auditor General. So you cannot bring in any other body to do what one would call public audit of the government. Remember when the president pronounced after the Gen Z, the civil unrest that we had last year, the president announced, because there were doubts and discussion around the accuracy of our public debt and the public debt register. So the president announced that there would be a team put in place to audit the public debt. But that met headwinds because the questions asked, the question of constitutionality was raised. So that is where it is. But the Office of the Auditor General is at liberty to engage any audit firm, any private audit firm, to conduct the audit on her behalf. And she would, again, then sign the audit report. Mm-hmm. So long as she signs the audit report, it doesn't matter. She can engage, that is provided in law. She can engage private audit firms. Mm-hmm. But something that I would want to also mention is that you could, maybe you don't call it public audit, but you can call it maybe an evaluation, an assessment, analysis, like we have just engaged IMF, a team. They're here in town doing a governance audit. But we are not calling it governance audit. You're calling it a governance diagnostic. Mm-hmm. So you see, you can play around with words and get the same result. So that we engage other public entities. We could engage even civil society to come and critique and look at our system. We can deal with our development partners, like now I've mentioned IMF, mm-hmm. To come and help and assist in that line. So that is the answer that I would give on that. Okay. On the issue of whether, Kennedy asked whether we could be deliberate in our policy on privatization to benefit wananchi and not elites. Yes, I agree with you, but you see, when you privatize, one of the cardinal rules is it must be competitive. So when you leave something to competitiveness, you may not again introduce controls that would bar or stop others unreasonably. And sometimes the reason why the so-called elites benefit from privatization is they're the ones with economic power. Because again, when we privatize, we offer for sale. And by the way, look at Safaricom. They were very fair. There was a fair allocation of shares. You find, and that is why it ended up that some people didn't even now see the value of the Safaricom shares, because it was distributed too thinly to people. But again, you must have that economic power to participate in the privatization.
Okay.
So you may find that some people are locked out, not because anyone wants them out, but because they don't have the economic power to be able to purchase or get a piece of the privatized institution. But I get you and I hear you. We need to be reviewing our policies continuously to see how friendly they are to everybody, to every Kenyan. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. There's an aspect you want to come in, or I can let me ask this before it skips my mind. The aspect of maintenance.
Maintenance.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it says some of our public assets are also not well maintained or managed. You mentioned public universities, for example. Look at what is happening at the Moi University. But even government buildings, some of them are not well maintained. Now we'll talk about they have been within county governments and they need to maintain them. What are we doing to make sure that there is proper maintenance of our public assets?
You know, when you talk about maintenance, it comes back to the whole question of management of public assets. And it is first, do we know which are these public assets? Do we know where they are? That is the first thing. Map out, get all the public assets into our register, do valuation, which is ongoing. I think by May we should be done by onboarding the values of our assets. There is already a committee, because we have so many public assets that have no value attached to them. But you look at them, they should be having very high value. Even some... Yes, exactly. Yes, the Uhuru Park. We need value of even our forest. In fact, Malombe here was telling me we don't even know the value of Mau forest. And it is thousands and thousands of acres of land in a very, well, I don't want to call it a productive area, because we don't want anything
to encourage
produce there. That's a forest. So you need to get to know the value of the assets, and then in terms of management, then you get to know how they are managed. But now, look, you have talked about some of them are in very bad state. The mistake, again, that we have done is to try, as a government, to run all these assets, even when we don't have the capacity and the ability to do so. And that is why recently the cabinet approved some reforms on state-owned enterprises, where 42 state-owned enterprises have been collapsed into 20, because many of them have overlapping mandates. Some of them have duplication of mandate. In fact, I was asking, you have National Water Harvesting Authority, mm-hmm. and then you have National Irrigation Authority. Mm-hmm. Now, harvesting irrigation, why do you harvest and another person irrigates? You can harvest and irrigate. So why do we have National Water Harvesting Authority here harvesting water, then giving to another authority now to do irrigation? Those are the kind of duplications that we don't need. There are some state-owned enterprises doing business that the line ministries can basically do. So those ones, we are transferring their functions, about 16 of them, transferring their functions to the line ministries. Some of them have become obsolete, and the activities that they are doing are no longer relevant. We are collapsing them. We are actually dissolving them. There are some, some funds which metamorphosed into being state enterprises. You don't understand how. So the funds are supposed to be managed as funds. And finally, you also find there are certain professional bodies. I belong to accountancy profession. I'm a member of the Institute of Certified Public Accountant. We have never gone to the government to give us a shilling. We contribute as members and we run our activities. LSK, the same. Then you go to engineers board, is a parastatal, getting funded from government. Why? Those are the contradictions, and they are draining our resources. We are spending 487 billion shillings, 17.8% of all our revenue that we collect. We spend on what? We are spending that money on running state-owned enterprises. Mm-hmm. Finally, There are some which are just inefficiently run. And I want to talk about university, and I hope you'll understand me very well here, because we have students from the universities. Our public universities, the way we are running them is not sustainable. We are just living a lie. It's not sustainable at all. Universities, what is the core mandate of a university? Research and consultants. Education is actually secondary. Educating our children is secondary. Actually, we educate our children to get knowledge, but to help universities do research, to help move the economy forward. How many of our universities do research that you can be proud of? Let me tell you something. And the reason why I was employed at the University of Nairobi as my first employer is that we came up with very good ideas when we were students. Actually, these students, if they're coming from University of Nairobi, they will tell you there's something called strategic management units, SMUs. There are about 10 of them. That SMU, terminology SMU, I'm the one who generated it. And that is why I was employed in the University of Nairobi. Now, the SMU concepts and the parallel program were supposed to be stopgap measures to help university run, because we had challenges running our universities. They were not supposed to be an end. Now, that is where we lost it. The university is now concentrated on offering parallel programs. When the government changed the policy just like that, by now admitting all students who get C+ and above, the universities had nobody to educate in parallel programs, and now that revenue stream dried. This was a stopgap measure to transition us to where universities would do research and consultancy. That is how the universities outside there make money. Okay. But now, you see, we are running university exclusively from exchequer. It is not going to be practical for us. In fact, even our constitution speaks to providing basic education. Okay. That is what the constitution mandates the government to do. Basic education. We are supposed to support university education, not to run university education exclusively. Okay. So the university management in this country must think outside the box, how to manage universities to be able to generate revenue, so that when we support them, they would be universities which are first class, which can attract even people from outside to come to this country for education.
Thank you for that. There's the aspect.
I don't know whether I digress, but anyway, I wanted to
I think it's a good information and for public knowledge. Yeah. But there's the aspect of public assets being a commercial entity rather than being public service entities. I know we'll talk about Expressway, for instance, which was built through a PPP model, but now it's more of a commercial entity. I have to pay to use it. Is that what you envision as a country, where I build an infrastructure, I pay taxes towards it, but how does that model then benefit the very common person that you are building the infrastructure for?
No, let me just address this issue. I think for the Expressway, apart from paying for diversion, we paid some little money for diversion and clearing the way. The Expressway, we never used taxes, the Kenyan taxes, to develop it. It was exclusively a PPP program, a PPP project done, and it will be used over a period and handed over to us when that time comes. So we have options. You should be having options. Once we finish the road down, you have an option to go into the traffic jam, and pay nothing. Or you use the expressway and pay something. So you are paying for convenience here. And by the way, it is a very fair system, because it is for those who can afford. That is how actually taxation and levies should be levied. Okay. Those who can afford. But so the PPP you will have to pay, because PPP is some private investor coming with their money to invest in a public project for you. And that is why you find we have tried to get PPP. She will speak to it when we get there. When we try to get PPP for water projects. It is not easy because water is the cheapest commodity. And an investor, these are not philanthropists. You know, when I had people talking about Adani, and I always come back to this topic, talking Adani like he's a philanthropist. This man was coming to this country to invest and make money. He's a business person with money. He wants to invest. So you don't expect him to come and do philanthropy here. He gets the maximum. It is for us to stop him from extracting maximum from us. So it is a question of competition. He wants to extract, we also want to extract from him.
Okay.
Now, that is how PPPs work world over. But now, in terms, I know what you are also hinting is the tolling. There is also the other bit of tolling that we need to understand. Even roads that are done through taxes. You know, you have invested the tax, but you have to maintain it. Either you again use the same taxes that are being paid to maintain that road over the years if you have sufficient resources from taxes. Or you now charge people who are using it more. Because, like, if I don't have a car, I am paying taxes. It is used to maintain a road, which you with a car use, and I don't use that road. In fact, when I'm walking in that road, I risk, because you will knock me down. So they have even put for me a pedestrian lane so that I avoid the road. I am not using that road unless when I take a matatu. You are using it every day, and you want us to pay the same. Are you not being unfair? So in terms of fairness of taxes and levies, those who use an asset more should pay more. That is why tolling, I hear people, someone sent me a message when I talked about tolling, that no matter how good this, it can't work in Kenya. You know, Kenyans have this habit of always dismissing that anything cannot work. And when you go to other countries, it works. Tolling, so long as it is reasonable, don't put rates that are prohibitive, that again drains Kenyans. But if it is reasonable, it is okay. Because when I use asset more, I should pay for it more. When I go to a hotel and I look for a presidential suite, I will pay 300,000. And in the same building, the same hotel, someone is paying 15,000. I am not going to come. And by the way, the beds are probably the same. If you look at the beds where we sleep, they're just the same. It is just psychological. I'm just psychologically prepared that this is a presidential suite and it is from here to there. And I'm just alone in that room, walking around and coming to sleep on the same bed. And I pay 300,000. Someone else sleeping in ordinary room. The space is small, which he doesn't need. Like I also don't need the big space. He pays 15. So that is the mindset that I think we should have. Not the mindset of thinking anything, if you are charged the toll, now why are you charging me again? I'm paying taxes.
Okay.
Fine, you are paying taxes, but others are also paying taxes, and you are using that service or that facility more.
Okay.
Thank you, Waziri. Just one question.
Your name once again, if you don't mind.
Yeah. My name is Meshak Odede.
Yes.
Yeah. Just one question, Waziri, and probably any other member of your team about the assets maintenance. What, in your opinion, and the opinion of the team, would be some of the biggest challenges we have as a country in maintaining our assets, and probably what are some of the solutions the Treasury or the team are now bringing on board to solve such kind of challenges, if they're there? Thank you.
Once again, I'm Jackson Mbadi, a student leader from University of Nairobi and a student engineer. And I just have one question, CS Honorable John Mbadi, and to your team. Why do we continue borrowing more and heavily instead of maximally utilizing what we already have?
Yeah, thank you, CS. Let me pick the question of maintenance. What do we see as challenges? And one of the challenges you see is costs. maintenance of roads, particularly when an asset is being used time and again, then the question of costs come in. And the National Treasury and generally government has been providing resources for maintenance of these assets. The second thing we see when it comes to maintenance is monitoring the warranty periods. Remember, if you do a building, there's what we call the period for workmanship, 6 months. Sometimes it's machines in hospitals, is 2 years. That warranty period, it needs to be monitored and managed. And then the final one is actually Kenyans. Interestingly, sometimes I need to take a job and I tender for it, but I'm not able to do the quality workmanship which is expected. So what are the solutions? The first solution is cost sharing. You note before counties, this concept of cost sharing to get MRI machines in counties, dialysis machines, was not there, right? And the Treasury came up with a policy, and the policy is able to facilitate governors and even national hospitals to cost share. So instead of a Kenyan coming from Kakamega to Nairobi, he can actually get those services in Kakamega level 5 hospital through cost sharing. The government puts in some resources, and then the private sector, the person who is sick, also puts in some resources. That, and it's the same concept CS is saying, tolling. The money you get from the tolls will not be enough to maintain, for example, Nairobi Mau Summit. But you toll, and then you add some government levy, some government resources, then you maintain the road, and the road is passable. It's the same concept in universities. When I was a university student, we used to pay for our hostels. It was not full market rate. I pay some little money as a student, the university puts in money, and the hostel is maintained. The other one we see is leveraging on technology. If we leverage on technology, for example, and now we have operationalized IFMI's fixed asset module to monitor when is this asset due for maintenance. Sometimes maintenance becomes expensive because we don't commit ourselves to maintenance schedules. For example, your car. If you're supposed to go 5,000 kilometers, then you take it for service, you wait for 10 years, for 10,000, then it starts emitting the black smoke. And people will be wondering, why is this guy not maintaining his car? At that point, the casket is gone and many other things. Had you taken it at that point, you'll have only spent 5,000, 10,000. The last one is feedback from the users of these assets. The question of monitoring and evaluation of use of government assets is very key when it comes to, for example, if you do a bore and you find Kenyans are not using the bore, you need to ask yourself why. Maybe over time the water has become salty, right? And you are still investing in the same salty water. So that feedback between citizens and government is useful. What are we doing about it? We have come up with a system called PIMIS, Public Investment Management Information System. It's likely to have a public portal to provide feedback to government. This project was meant to serve 4,000 people. Is it serving 4,000 people? Because the 4,000 people means less cost if it is utilized by 4,000 and above. If it is being utilized by 2,000, then it means more cost and further subsidization. I think I would want to leave that question there.
Thank you. CS, there was
Now,
the aspect of
why do we
continue borrowing?
when we?
Yeah.
Thank you, Malombe, for that. Why do we continue borrowing more instead of optimizing what we already have? So, the reason why we borrow is because we have an expenditure, and we balance that expenditure with the revenue. And if the expenditure is more than our revenue, either we drop the expenditure or we borrow. Dropping expenditure sometimes becomes a challenge because you have to provide also services. And that is where there is a contradiction, because sometimes, like in Kenya today, we spend so much money on loans to debt servicing or debt servicing. Yet, this money comes from the same the very Kenyans who cannot now get services because you are paying loans. So they start resisting paying taxes. And that is what you are seeing today, the debate whether we should continue paying taxes. It is because Kenyans feel they are not getting services, and one of the reasons why they don't get services is because we spend what we take from them to service our loans. So, to now get back to your question, we are aware and conscious of the fact that we are not optimizing our assets, our public assets effectively. And that is why there are so much reforms around public assets, so that we can generate maximum out of them. And that begins with what is the contribution of these assets to the economy, to generate revenue in terms of taxes, to be and other levies, to be able to service our debts and also provide services to Kenyans. But I would not lie to you that a time will come when the Kenyan economy will not borrow. That is not tenable. The world as it is structured today, that you must borrow, but borrow responsibly. So we will continue borrowing, but borrowing responsibly, and borrowing what we can afford to pay. So it is about debt sustainability. Which economy in the world, I'm not aware of any economy, maybe, if they are there, there are very few, which don't borrow. And by the way, when you stop borrowing, you will also find yourself, you are not expanding your infrastructure and your asset base. And in the long run, it will catch up with you. There was a time in this country that we were not borrowing externally because we were denied that space. And even domestic borrowing was not forthcoming very well. What happened? If you left Nairobi for Nakuru, you would take 10 hours. Between Naivasha and Nakuru was not possible. I know probably you were not there then. I was in the university, so I doubt whether you were there. But that is the life that we were going through. The world's biggest economy is also the world's biggest borrower, the US government. So people will borrow. So long as you have the capacity to borrow, economies will borrow.
Right.
But borrow responsibly. First, maximize or optimize the use of your assets and mobilize as much revenue as you possibly can. That is what we call revenue mobilization. Once you are done with that, then borrow responsibly and spend efficiently.
Good point. Let's give it to Waziri. Thank you so much, sir, for your contribution on assets management. Thank you so much for being part of this episode. You can still send in your comments and questions to our SMS line 20316. Our WhatsApp line is 0786 316 316. You can also get an opportunity to engage with us on our social media platforms, both for family media and, of course, those of the ministry. So feel free to send in your questions, and we'll be sharing them with the CS for possible action. Thank you. Until next time, bye-bye for now.